As we get closer to Election Day on July the 4th, all attention is now turning to which seats could change on election night. Where will we see those political earthquakes and which MPs will be clinging onto their seats come the morning? I'm LBC's political editor Natasha Clark, and I'm joined here today by LBC's brand new political correspondent Aggie Chambre. Which seats are you looking at? Which are your top seats?
Well, I'll take you through all of my top seats, but I think number one has got to be Jeremy Hunt's seat. So this is obviously the Chancellor, so it'll be a big deal if he loses his seat. He's got almost a 9,000 majority, but there has been talk, as you know, for quite a long time that actually he might not be able to hold on to it. Even he has admitted literally anything could happen. So this seat was called South West Surrey. It is now called Godalming and Ash. What have you heard about that seat?
Look, it doesn't look good for Jeremy Hunt, of course, and we know that the Liberal Democrats are absolutely chomping at his heels. It was so much so that I think a couple of months ago, Aggie, I don't know about you, but I was hearing that he wasn't going to stand at all. We were hearing rumours for around a year that he might not even bother going into the election, that he could stand down as Chancellor beforehand. And of course, we know that no sitting Chancellor has ever lost their seat in a general election so far. So could this be a Portillo moment? You know, that sort of 1997 moment where Michael Portillo lost his seat, everybody saying, where were you when Michael Portillo lost his seat? Could that be, you think, one of the big moments for this election campaign?
I mean, it possibly could be, and that's what people have been saying, right? But it's amazing, and I know that we're going to talk about lots of constituencies with lots of huge majorities, but 9,000, I don't know about you, 2019, I don't think we would have seen 9,000 as a marginal seat. It's not a marginal seat, but there's basically no such thing as a marginal anymore. There's no such thing as a safe seat. So the fact that we're talking openly about the fact that Jeremy Hunt might lose his seat with almost a 10,000 majority is astonishing in itself. And the amazing thing as well is he is not the only cabinet minister at risk, right?
Of course, yeah. Some of the polling saying that they think half of all of Rishi Sunak's cabinet could be at risk of losing their seat. I can't ever remember hearing about an election anywhere near like it. Some of those seats, including obviously Penny Mordaunt, many people see her as a potential leadership candidate. Grant Shapps. There were even some people suggesting that Suella Braverman could be at risk. I think that's just probably a little bit too much for me. But look, there are a lot of big names. They really could be many Portillo moments at this election overnight, couldn't there?
And that's the thing you kind of picked up on there. Like, who is actually going to be around to lead the Conservative Party? And lots of people who maybe have been doing that shadow boxing, been on manoeuvres for ages, might actually not be around after the election. So I'd actually love to just talk about Penny Mordaunt's seat a bit more. So that's Portsmouth North. She has a 16,000 majority. But yeah, you're right. That is one of the seats that's being talked about. Maybe she won't be there after the election. She's at risk by Labour, I believe it is.
We should also mention Rishi Sunak as well, because look, a very safe Tory seat in Richmond and Northallerton, which again is a seat that's slightly changed boundaries, isn't it, in this election campaign as well, as many seats are. So in a way, some of these big MRP polls that we're looking at in the past sort of few weeks, they are obviously, you know, historically they've been quite accurate, but because we've got new boundaries, it really is all to play for in some of these seats as well. The idea that a sitting Prime Minister, though, could lose his seat, how likely do you think that is?
I think we've sort of said this, anything could happen. It's not likely in the sense that it has literally never happened before, and he has got an absolutely huge majority, and it's true blue North Yorkshire. But
I don't think it's going to happen.
There has been a report, there has been a poll that he could lose his seat. Will it happen? Probably not. But anything is still to play for. And the fact that we're even having this conversation shows.
It would be such a moment if it did. And, you know, it would be just really showing the death of the Conservative Party if indeed it does happen. So, yeah, that would be pretty shocking. Another constituency we wanted to discuss is, of course, Nigel Farage's Clacton fight. He's going for an MP for the 8th time. He's obviously tried so many times to get into Parliament. He really obviously doesn't struggle to get votes in these elections, of course. Brexit Party, UKIP, millions of votes were cast for them, but they just didn't manage to get it over the line in so many places. And he's going for this previously Clacton upon Sea, it's now Clacton. Of course, the only constituency that was won by UKIP at that sort of in that by-election in that way. It's Reform's number one target, and you went there earlier in the campaign, didn't you? What did you sort of pick up on the doorstep there?
Well, the interesting thing with Nigel Farage is he said to me a few days after the election was called, it's impossible. I cannot win enough support in 6 weeks. I can't do it. And then a couple of days later, he was like, actually, scrap that, I can do it. And so he is now running. So even he was saying, it might still be impossible. I really don't know whether I can win it. On the Monday, he said, in 24 hours at midday tomorrow, I'm going to do this, the launch of my campaign. And he turned up.
Oh my God, it was amazing, wasn't it? Like, just in terms of seeing the number of people that came out for him to come out on that Clacton pier and who were cheering his name. Like, it was something I don't remember sort of seeing politicians getting that. You know, if you go to a Rishi Sunak rally or a Keir Starmer rally, you don't get that sort of support, do you?
No, and it's different. It's uncontrolled. I mean, I should say, you know, they say there were 2,000 people there. I think maybe they weren't quite that, but there were many hundreds. But there were some people there who really hate him as well. You know, he really, really does divide people. But, you know, let's not forget that all-important majority. Giles Watling was the MP before, and he had a 25,000 majority. So can Nigel Farage do it? Even he said earlier in the campaign it's impossible. But as you say, it's the number one target for reform. So let's see what happens there.
And the Ipsos Mori poll as well, showing that he is on track to win it. He's on 52% according to their projections, almost double what Labour are on 24%. Like, if those polls are correct, then that really does show a real, you know, as Nigel himself said, is something happening out there. So yeah, it's all to play for Giles Watling, who's obviously trying to hold that seat for the Conservative Party, and it'll be really interesting just to see how far reform can eat into that vote.
Speaking of reform, we should also talk about the only constituency that has already been represented by a Reform MP, and that's Ashfield.
Of course, yeah, that's Lee Anderson's constituency, and he'll obviously be fighting hard to hold on to it. And obviously, he's you know, such a man of the area. He's grown up around there. He's had a lot of experience, obviously serving on the council there as well. And I think he'll have quite a lot of local support. And I think, you know, you also went up there to see Lee Anderson's constituency as well. Did you sort of feel that on the ground too?
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, the thing with him is it's like, yeah, he grew up there, but also his dad grew up there, his granddad grew up there. You know, he knows a lot of people. When I went out leafleting with him, and he was like, oh, let's just go over here. This is my mate's house. So he sort of really does want to make the point that he knows.
Got that
he has got that. He pointed to a leaflet. He pointed to a poster in someone's window. I was like, oh, look at that. And I was like, oh, do you know them? He was like, yeah, of course.
He's not been milkshaked yet either, obviously. No kind of, obviously, you know, reform. You know, they've got some people that like them, some people that don't. But equally, I think Lee Anderson, again, a very Marmite character. Previously, when he was in the Conservative Party as well, that deputy, serving as that deputy Conservative leader role as well. But equally, like I say, got quite a lot of a local vote, local support. So there is a chance he could probably hang on to his seat here, right?
I think definitely, yes. So when I went out on the doorstep with him, but then I went out on the high street and just voxed people, and I probably spoke to 20 people, didn't find one person who actually was a definite Tory voter. Instead, I found people who were going to vote for Labour, vote for Reform, or were unsure. And so, you know, keep in mind these people most recently voted in a Tory MP. That was pretty striking in itself.
And we obviously, you know, he is the first person that went over to defect to Reform. So he has such a big impact on the party already. But, you know, like I say, he's the one seat in Parliament on the previous Parliament, but, you know, could be joined by, if the polls are correct, up to 7 more of his colleagues potentially. So, yeah, one to definitely watch on election night. I also wanted to mention Geoffrey Cox's seat down in West Devon as well. It's quite incredible that we've got a Prime Minister that just a few weeks out for election day spent almost the entire day in Devon, somewhere that you just think it's true Tory blue. Why on earth would he be campaigning in areas like this? And we've been hearing this for the last couple of days, that people in those key constituencies, they're being put into these safe seats, activists flooding it, in an attempt to try and hold on to these places with huge Tory majorities. So should we be watching out for places like this on election night?
I mean, the thing with elections, right, is politicians spend time in target seats. They don't have time to go to every different bit of the country. They spend time in target seats. So what on earth Rishi Sunak was doing in first a constituency with a 25,000 majority and then a 15,000 majority in, as you say, West Devon of all places, 2 weeks out from the election campaign, 2 weeks out from the election, seems pretty odd. So does he think that he might be able to lose that seat? I was speaking to someone close to Geoffrey Cox and said, sorry, what's going on here? And he said, look, Geoffrey Cox has never considered this a safe seat. He has always considered this a marginal. I know that was my reaction. You know, it's been Tory since 2005. But that's what they say. I mean, I'm not sure whether that's right or not. But absolutely fascinating that this is where Rishi Sunak and, as you say, Conservative activists are choosing to put their resources.
And David Cameron as well, out there campaigning on a farm as well, alongside the Prime Minister. And obviously, when, you know, we first saw David Cameron come back into the cabinet at the end of last year with that shock reshuffle that we saw, I think many people expected to see David Cameron helping Rishi Sunak hang on to those sort of blue wall seats that might be more vulnerable to the Liberal Democrats. So it could be that on the night they see Liberal Democrats really eating into parts of their voting. The new constituency is Torridge and Tavistock. So, yeah, it'll be really interesting to see on the night how much of that gets eaten up by the Lib Dem vote, or whether some of David Cameron's advice might have helped Rishi Sunak out.
OK, shall we move on to Bristol Central?
That's going to be really interesting for the Green Party, of course. Carla, the party's co-leader, she's trying to unseat Labour's Thangam Debbonaire. There's a huge majority for her, 28,000. That would be absolutely incredible if the Green Party could do that. But they have had some recent success there, most notably in the recent local elections as well, where they did really, really well in those council elections, picking up a lot of seats.
I think this is really interesting as well, because this, unlike the other seats we're talking about, is not a Tory loss. So this is one of the few seats that actually a Labour, and a quite senior Labour MP at that, could lose their seat. And this could be somewhere where the Greens get their second MP.
And of course, Caroline Lucas standing down in Brighton, as she's been the party's real only Green representative, and any high-profile one for such a long time. But really, it might go some way to sort of talk about the narrative that on the left of the Labour Party, they could be potentially losing votes, especially after they watered down their Green promises. We had £28 billion worth of promises from the Labour Party. That's no longer in the party's manifesto. They've really scaled back their ambitions. There are lots of people on the left of the Labour Party that might now be thinking, if Keir Starmer has shifted to the centre, am I going to be looking for elsewhere to place my vote, either with the Green Party, potentially with the Liberal Democrats? This is one of those areas where we will really see whether Keir Starmer has lost big parts of the left of his party, I think.
That's so interesting. How do you think the Greens have done this campaign?
I think, to be fair, they've done a little better in terms of being a bit more high profile than they thought. Of course, they've been a part of those key election debates as well. And I think for them, having them on the sort of stage, Carla Denyer, I think, did pretty well holding her own against 6 other very strong leadership candidates who've obviously been around the block for quite a lot longer than she has. So I think the Greens, we haven't really spoken too much about them this campaign, but I think, yes, they could pick up quite a lot of votes in some certain areas of the country too.
This seat we have heard a lot about already in this campaign. This is Chingford and Woodford Green. Tash, what's going on?
Of course, Iain Duncan Smith, he's quite a recognisable name. Everybody's heard of him, the former Tory leader. He's quite prominent in the House of Commons as well. He does stand up and talk about a lot of issues. He's very strong on China, of course. He's very sort of anti the Chinese regime. And one of the things that he was saying to our sister station, the News Agents, earlier this week as well, was that, he was the guy that's going to stand up on China. Is your other candidate, the Labour Party candidate, going to do that? I thought it was quite an interesting argument he's trying to make of being that representative. He said something like, I stand up to everybody and I'm loud enough, and I'll basically have a fight with anybody. So could he cling on to that? Will be really interesting to look at it. Obviously an outer London seat as well. So we'll see what happens there.
It's interesting on the kind of numbers, isn't it? I know we've already, it's ridiculous to have a conversation about a majority that's just over 1,000 and have a majority about something that's 25,000 in the same conversation and say, well, maybe Iain Duncan Smith will hold on, but, Geoffrey Cox won't. But I think that is part of the conversation. I think a lot of the Conservative candidates have made their campaigns much more local. Yeah. And so, as you say, Iain Duncan Smith's been making the point about himself, what he's doing.
There's not a lot of talk about Rishi Sunak. There's not a lot of pictures from the leaflets that I've seen anyway. There's not a lot of talk about Rishi Sunak on the leaflets and what he's done. Even you've seen Boris Johnson, of course, those campaign videos endorsing some people in certain seats as well, trying to get him to talk about it because they think he will be more popular than the Prime Minister. So that's really something as well, isn't it?
Exactly. And we should talk about the fact that the Labour candidate has just been replaced. So the Labour candidate was Faiza Shaheen, who had a lot of support locally.
Very left-wing candidate as well, not liked by some of the Keir Starmer sort of more centrist parts of the party. And, she feels that she's been really treated really unfairly there, of course, doesn't she?
So she was recently removed as the candidate, and there's a new candidate who actually grew up in Wembley and lives in Wembley rather than the area.
Not a local candidate as well, so...
Not a local candidate, so I don't know how much that will affect the vote. But there was a really interesting episode, as you referenced there, of the News Agents talking about that constituency earlier this week. Moving back to the Tories, one of the interesting candidates who might lose their seat is Steve Baker. What's going on there?
Of course, you'll remember the very start of the election campaign, he was off on holiday, decided not to cancel it, despite obviously the fact that he is, in what we would call almost a marginal in normal times, but now, of course, it is a majority of around 4,000 votes. His Wickham constituency is one of Labour's top target seats. Of course, he obviously is a very well-known former Brexit minister. He's been a key part in the ERG, of course, over the years because of his stance on Brexit, his stance on the right, traditionally, of the Conservative Party, came into government, has potentially been a little bit more, I think, behaved since he's come into government, become a little bit less loud on the airwaves. But yes, that will be a really interesting seat to watch, because we'll be able to see sort of if it does flip to Labour, will people go, well, that's because Steve Baker wasn't knocking on doors hard enough? Or is it because of this Labour landslide that we, could see sweep across the country?
Do you know his excuse why he went on holiday? I love it. His excuse was that he wanted to take an 89-year-old friend sailing because he'd promised he had, which I actually think is a really lovely excuse.
That's quite sweet, actually. You know what? I forgive Steve Baker for that one. I really want to talk as well about Ashton under Lyme. That is Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party's constituency. And I'm really intrigued to see how the Workers' Party, George Galloway's party, do in terms of taking chunks out of Labour's vote. And you remember Keir Starmer's LBC interview that he did last year at conference, where he was talking about, and he really got into a muddle about talking about potentially cutting off access to food and water in Gaza. It really caused such a stir in so many parts of so many communities. We were hearing it day in, day out on LBC, people ringing in to say how upset they were with Keir Starmer's comments. It took him far too long, many people thought, to clarify those comments. So will George Galloway's Workers' Party be able to really talk to those disaffected voters in communities like Ashton and try and nibble away at Labour's vote? I think that'll be a really interesting one to watch on the night.
This is a seat that I don't think will change hands, but, let's watch this after election and see if I'm right or not. But this is Aberdeen South, and that's Stephen Flynn, who's the SNP Westminster leader.
Of course, and, a majority, 3,900. So equally, when we're talking about vulnerabilities, of course it is. And, there is no path to Downing Street that doesn't go through Scotland for Labour. They have got to make big gains if they are going to win back the keys to number 10 Downing Street. Of course, and Stephen Flynn, very straight talking, very good in the House of Commons, genuinely stands up, I think, and a lot of people really do listen to the things he says. He's obviously been incredibly prominent talking about Gaza, the Israel war as well. But yes, the collapse of the SNP vote, this is going to be a real theme of this election as well, which we've really not had even a chance to really get stuck into, I think, for many people south of the border. Nicola Sturgeon, all of what's happened with her and her husband in the last year, those arrests, those accusations of embezzling money, of course, and then Humza Yousaf taking over, not doing incredibly well, and then being forced to hand over to John Swinney. Places like this will be really interesting to see how much Labour can really take back those votes from the SNP. They've been in power for 17 years. It's in many ways it should be quite easy for Labour to do so, but they're still holding up in so many places.
Yeah, and also this seat's interesting because it was most recently, before it was SNP, it was a Tory seat. It was Ross Thompson, who was fairly well known there as well. So I'm not sure that Labour's going to be able to cut through in that seat. But yeah, let's wait and see.
So from Aberdeen South to South West Surrey, those are the seats that we think you should be keeping an eye out for on election night. And you can follow all of the action on LBC and LBC News with our special overnight programme, Britain Decides.